I'm standing in a field of cannabis. Now, we normally think of marijuana as a recreational drug, but there's only one molecule in cannabis that makes you high. There are actually more than 100 other different and interesting chemical substances in these plants. And they offer huge medical potential because they might be able to tap into one of the body's natural systems, one that runs on its own cannabis-like molecules and is key.
It is involved in memory, it is involved in epilepsy, it is involved in schizophrenia, it is involved in a huge number of human diseases.
Understanding the medicinal properties of these cannabis compounds has been a long time coming.
It is extremely difficult to initiate a clinical trial with an illicit drug.
While the science may be scant, the community has already taken it up.
It's been 4.5 years on the medicinal cannabis, and for us it's been a huge change, and yeah, I don't think it'd still be here. I really don't.
Now, researchers are applying scientific rigour to convert anecdote into data, so we might fully and safely harness the medicinal power of cannabis.
It's a very exciting time at the moment in the world of medicinal cannabis.
Freedom!
Cannabis isn't just one drug, it's potentially 200 drugs or more.
Cannabis is a versatile plant, also known as hemp, marijuana and weed. It's been used throughout history as a fibre, an intoxicant and a medicine.
For millennia, plants were essentially the only source of drugs. We have actually written data by Assyrians in the Middle East that they used cannabis for neurological diseases 3,000 years ago. The wide use of cannabis as a drug was in India, in China, and the Middle East for thousands of years.
Queen Victoria used cannabis tinctures for her period pain, so she was actually an enthusiast who enjoyed the analgesic effects. And really, what you see is that the extracts were very widely used for all sorts of different conditions.
By the time the 20th century rolled in, cannabis had acquired a very different image. It was seen as a drug of abuse and made illegal. And as a result, there was much less focus on its medicinal properties. It was taken up by counterculture youth through the decades, and cannabis got a bad name.
Cannabis just joins the list as another traditional bad drug that turns out may have remarkable therapeutic effects.
That therapeutic potency is found in the plant's active chemicals. They're called cannabinoids.
Well, there's an awful lot of them, and they have terribly long names, and so we abbreviate them into things like CBD for cannabidiol. We've got a CBC, we've got a CBN. It's like a really bad Scrabble hand.
Despite their cold acronyms, out in the field, the cannabinoids are quite pretty.
So this was originally just a seed trial crop, but it displays the same sort of thing when it flowers for the cannabinoids.
Right, so what part of the plant has the cannabinoids?
It's all those little crystals you can see in there.
So you can see,
and they're all
kind
different
of glint
shapes.
in the light.
Yeah, they glint in the light.
The number and type of cannabinoids on a plant varies depending on what the crop was bred for.
So you've got roughly about 5 to 7% cannabinoids on this plant. It's a seed variety, and that's what it's designed for. If this was a marijuana plant, it would be mostly, or 90% THC. But this is so minuscule in THC, it's got room for all the other cannabinoids to exist on the plant.
THC is an acronym for tetrahydrocannabinol. Of the more than 100 cannabinoids, its heady qualities have made it the most famous.
THC is this bit of the cannabis plant which makes you stoned, you get a high feeling, so it is psychoactive, and it also impairs your cognitive performance.
Despite its mind-altering effects, THC also has potential therapeutic applications, particularly in pain reduction and appetite stimulation. Interestingly, the levels of THC in street cannabis have changed over the last 40 years.
A couple of years ago, we did a study with the New South Wales Police. And what we found was that typical Australian street cannabis has been sort of bred or selected to produce very high quantities of THCs. Guaranteed to get you very intoxicated, even with a small amount consumed. What was interesting about street cannabis was that there was hardly any CBD. It's the one that is most touted as being the good medicinal cannabinoid.
In yin and yang fashion, CBD, also known as cannabidiol, has the opposite effect to THC.
CBD is a really interesting therapeutic. It can reduce anxiety. And there's also evidence to show that it has anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects.
Amazingly, it was only 30 years ago that we discovered why these cannabis compounds affect us.
In the 80s, a group in the US found a receptor that THC binds to. This receptor is known today as cannabinoid receptor 1.
There are two known cannabinoid receptors in the body. CB1, which is expressed abundantly in the brain, and CB2, present in the immune system. Both are found in the central nervous system. It was Professor Mechoulam, an early pioneer in cannabis science, who discovered that these receptors respond to our very own cannabis compounds. They're called endocannabinoids.
Now, we know that receptors do not exist just because there is a plant out there. Receptors exist to be activated by compounds that our body makes.
There are two main endocannabinoids. There's 2-AG, which is the most common one found in the brain. There's also anandamide, which, among other places, is found in breast milk.
We're still learning about the endocannabinoid system. It's so pervasive. I mean, you find cannabinoids in your testicles, and you also find them in your brain, you find them in your fat, you find them in your liver, you find them all over the body and brain. So they have this kind of multifarious role, which is hard to pin down. The endocannabinoid system, in very general terms within the brain, acts as a regulator of excitability. So if the brain's too excited, endocannabinoids are released, and through a kind of negative feedback mechanism appear to dampen down excitability. They can also do the opposite though as well. If the brain is too inhibited, they can be released and actually upregulate excitability. So they're like a buffering system.
For many years, people smoked cannabis for its psychoactive effects, and no one imagined that those effects were brought about through interaction with the endocannabinoid system. But it's not surprising, because for the drugs to work, they have to be modulating something in the brain, and it turned out to be a natural cannabis system.
While we've learnt quite a lot about the body's natural cannabis system, we still don't know the specifics of how the various molecules in cannabis interact with our bodies. Well, that's what they're trying to work out here at the University of Sydney. Researchers are drawing on anecdotal community experience with medicinal cannabis to learn about the much touted benefit on one specific illness, childhood epilepsy.
As part of this study, I am travelling and visiting families who have a child with epilepsy, who are either currently using medicinal cannabis products, who have previously used and stopped for whatever reason, or those that have never used medicinal cannabis but simply want to talk a bit more about it.
There's a lot of community push for cannabis extracts to be developed as treatments for childhood epilepsy.
Thank you. A good day. We've had my all. Look at you, man, bunning it. Get your little top knot. Thank you. Hello.
One of the participating families is LJ Elwood and her 12-year-old son, Hunter.
What's going on, Ray?
Hunter has Dravet syndrome, a rare neurodevelopmental disorder where the child suffers intractable seizures. Hence, it's a form of epilepsy.
So this one here was when he was 2. It's just before he deteriorated quite a lot. He had a massive seizure not long after this that required him to go into ICU and be induced into a coma. So Yes, that started our sort of downhill time with him. It's important to control the seizures so that the children don't get brain damage or don't receive any damage to the brain, which of course with Hunter resulted in a loss of a lot of skills. Standing, talking, sitting, holding his head up, feeding himself, all these things that children lose with repeat seizures. Despite trying every available epilepsy medication, nothing successfully controlled Hunter's seizures. This here is his 5th birthday. He was